Find a comfortable position. Let your body settle without hurry. There is nothing you need to hold upright now. Nothing you need to keep carrying from one part of the night into the next. Tonight's story is called Falling Asleep in a Shepherd's Hut Beneath the Summer Hills. The path still holds warmth from the day, though the air above it has begun to change. It runs in a narrow, pale line through the grass, sometimes clear underfoot, sometimes half lost where dry stems have leaned across it and seeded over the edges. The ground is firm after long summer weather, packed flatter through the middle where boots have passed before, and softer at the margins where the earth loosens into dust and root and the fine crumble of old soil. Each step lifts the faintest trace of dryness from the track, not enough to be seen clearly, only enough to belong to the feeling of the season settling low over the hillside. On either side, the grass stands high in places and brushed down in others. Some stems are still green at the base, but most have passed now into late summer shades: straw, oat, faded olive, the pale wheat color that comes when long light and dry weather have worked steadily over a field. Seed heads tilt at different heights, some fine and feathery, some more compact and weighty, their tips catching what remains of the evening brightness before the light lowers further. When the path narrows, the grass brushes lightly against your calves and the lower part of your clothes, dry enough that it makes only the slightest papery sound. The hillside does not rise sharply. It lifts and falls in long, gradual shapes. That is part of what makes the walking feel restful. There is effort in it, but no strain. Only the steady work of crossing open ground where nothing presses close around the body yet. The slope ahead turns gently toward a higher shoulder of land. Further off, another line of field falls away behind a weathered fence, and a darker strip of earth where animals or wheels must have worn the grass thinner earlier in the season. Nothing in the landscape feels dramatic. It is simply open, wide enough for air to move freely across it, settled enough to hold the last of the day without trying to make anything grand of it. A breeze comes and goes in loose intervals. Not a cold wind, only the kind that arrives after a warm day when the sun has begun to lower and the hillside starts releasing heat back into the evening. It passes through the taller grass before it reaches you, shifting the seed heads and drawing one pale wave through them, and then another. By the time it reaches your face and hands, it has cooled a little from the warmth stored in the earth, though not enough yet to call the air chilly. It carries the dry scent of stems and sun-warmed ground, and something fainter underneath that, the green scent of crushed growth where the path has been walked often, and the field edges have been pressed back. Your steps sound very little here. The path takes them in without echo. Dry soil holds them more softly than stone would. Short grasses answer only with a small brushing at the edges. Now and then a seed head catches against the fabric at your knee and slides free again. Once, the heel of your shoe meets a patch of harder ground where the earth has compacted to a flatter surface, and the sound is briefly firmer before the track softens again. Most of the time, there is only the rhythm of walking, the slight pull and release in the muscles of the legs, the brush of grass, and the open quiet of summer land moving slowly toward evening. Somewhere far off, a gate gives a faint metal knock and then stills. Further away still, something in the fields makes a brief, ordinary sound, too distant to separate clearly. Perhaps an animal shifting near a trough or fence, perhaps only the small carrying of life across open ground. The sound does not disturb the hillside. It belongs to it in the same way the breeze belongs to it, briefly audible, and then gone again into the larger stillness that remains. Ahead, where the path bends past a worn post and rises a little, the shepherd's hut begins to show itself. At first, it is only a shape interrupting the field, small enough not to dominate the slope. dark enough at this distance to read first as timber and roof and wheels gathered into one useful form. Then, as you continue, the parts begin to separate. The body of the hut stands lifted slightly above the ground on its wheels and frame. The roof line slopes gently from one side to the other. A small window catches a little light and gives it back in a duller, softer square than glass in a house might give. The whole thing sits where it needs to sit, neither picturesque nor hidden, simply placed on the land as though it has spent many evenings there and expects to spend many more. That first sight matters, not because the hut is beautiful in some showy way, because it is enough. Out here among the dry grass and the broad evening slope, enough is what makes a shelter convincing. The hut does not offer itself as ornament. It offers itself as weathered timber, roof, wheel, step, door, a place that can keep a body in for the night once the air cools and the field light fades, and the open ground has done all it can do. You keep walking towards it. The path is clearer now, worn a little deeper where feet have traveled to and from the hut, and press the grasses back at the edges. In one place, the track widens where someone must have paused with boots set side by side often enough to flatten the ground. In another, the earth is marked by a shallower second line, where perhaps a wheelbarrow or cart once cut across the edge, and then vanished again into the thicker growth. These things are light in the land, not scars, only traces of ordinary use, and they draw the body onward without any need to think much about direction. The hut stands near a fence line that runs on in either direction before losing itself into the slope. One post leans a little. Another has silvered more strongly on the side facing the weather. A gate further off remains closed, its bars catching only one narrow strip of light before the angle shifts and leaves them dull again. The hut does not depend on these things for charm. They simply place it in the real world of field edges, worn routes, timber left to weather, the small structures by which open land is made livable. Closer now, the wheels become clearer. They are larger than the first view suggested, their rims dark, and their spokes or supports partly shadowed beneath the hut's body. One outer edge has picked up dust from the ground below. The frame above them is thick enough to feel dependable without looking heavy. A short set of steps or a raised tread stands at the door, its wood worn paler through the middle where feet have landed and turned before entering. The timber cladding on the hut itself has passed beyond fresh color into the long faded tones weather gives it. Grays browned by sun, warm old timber where the grain still shows through, darker seams where rain must once have run more steadily before the dry weeks began. The nearer you come, the less the larger hillside asks of your attention. The broad field remains where it was. The slope still holds the late light. The grass still lifts and settles in the breeze. But the body has begun orienting itself towards smaller, nearer things now. The rut of the path where it leads straight to the steps. The way the grass is flattened a little more closely near the base of the wheels. The metal latch on the door catching a brief dull glint. The lower edge of the hut wall where dust has risen in light traces from many dry days. The window no longer reads as a bright square in the field, only as a small pane holding the evening in a quieter way. The path narrows once more in the final stretch. Dry stems brush more closely here where the grass has leaned in from either side. One seed head catches against your hand and leaves a faint roughness there before slipping away. The ground immediately around the hut is firmer, more worn, less tufted than the field beyond. What earlier was open hillside has become approach now, and the approach has become orbit, the small circumference of ground around the hut where people step more slowly, turn more deliberately, pause before going in. The boards nearest the door show their grain more clearly. One runs straighter than the others. Another bears a darker knot near the middle. The paint, if there once was more of it, has long since thinned away into weather-softened timber, and only the faintest memory of color at the joints. The metalwork at the latch is practical and plain, not polished, but touched enough over time that the edges have brightened slightly where fingers have found them again and again. A hinge lower down carries the same sort of truth. Not decorative, not hidden, simply part of what has allowed the door to open and close through many evenings on the hill. The little window beside or above the berth line gives back only a softened reflection now. Not a house window brightness, only a pale trace of sky and moving grass blurred slightly by the angle and by whatever fine film of dust or dried, whether the season has left across the outer pane. Through it, the interior cannot yet be read clearly. There is only the suggestion of shadow within, of a smaller, dimmer space waiting just beyond the boards. You slow naturally as you reach the hut, not because there is any uncertainty in the body, but because arrival into a place this small changes pace by itself. The open field allowed long steps. The final approach asks less. Here the ground, the steps, the door, the latch, the narrow edge between outside air and enclosed space bring everything nearer at once. At the base of the steps, the grass is worn back enough to show more earth. The dry top layer has been scuffed lighter in places, darker in others where feet have pressed it more firmly. A small stone sits at the edge of the tread. One side of it is dull and dusty. The other catches the last of the evening light. Near the step, a few broken stems lie bent and pale where they have been crushed underfoot and left there by earlier comings and goings. None of it feels neglected, only used. You place a foot on the first step. The wood gives a more solid answer than the path beneath it did. Still weathered, still old enough to carry marks of use, but firmer now and closer to shelter. The higher you rise by even that small amount, the more the field begins to shift behind you. What was underfoot becomes something seen. What was around the body becomes something just beyond it. The air is still open, still moving over the hillside, but the hut is now close enough that its boards, its roof edge, its small window, and its door frame begin to gather the space inward. Your hand comes to rest on the door frame or latch. The timber is dry beneath the fingers, its surface smoothed slightly where repeated contact has worn back the rougher grain. Near the metal, the wood feels firmer still. The latch itself is cooler than the boards around it, holding less of the day's warmth now that evening has begun working more fully through the hill air. It does not feel cold in the way metal by water or winter would feel cold. Only enough to remind the hand that the open hillside still surrounds you for one moment more. From here, the last of the evening remains visible behind the hut. The field has started giving up some of its color. Greens have lowered toward olive and gray. The drier stems hold the light longer. Fence posts stand darker now against the slope. The path you followed no longer looks like a route, so much as a pale interruption through the grasses, already becoming part of the larger hillside again. The breeze moves once more across the hill. It touches the side of the hut, the hand at the latch, the face turned partly back toward the open ground. Its coolness is a little more noticeable now than it was further down the slope. Not sharp, only enough to make the nearness of shelter matter more clearly. You stand there for a breath or two longer, not yet going in. The step beneath your feet, the weathered door close at hand, the boards holding the day's last stored warmth more faintly than before, the field behind you beginning to flatten into evening, the sense, just beyond the threshold, of a smaller air, a wooden hush, a narrow, useful room ready to take over where the open land leaves off. That is enough for now. The hillside has brought you here. The path has narrowed. The hut has grown from shape to structure to threshold beneath your hand. And here, at the weathered door with the cooling summer air still moving lightly at your back, and the last of the evening resting across the dry grass behind you, the small shelter stands ready to take you in. You press the latch, and the door opens inward with the plain, familiar give of something often used, and never asked to do more than it should. The first thing that changes is not the light, but the air. Outside, the evening had moved freely over the slope and through the dry grass, touching skin and sleeves and the side of the hut without meeting much to stop it. Here, just within the doorway, the air is gathered and held. Not hot, not close in any unpleasant way, only contained. It carries the dry scent of timber boards that have warmed through the day and are now cooling more slowly than the hillside beyond them, along with the fainter, quieter smell of wool, old floorboards, and the sort of room that has been shut against weather often enough to keep its own temper. The door itself gives a small wooden answer as it moves, and one hinge adds the slightest low note before settling again. Nothing about the sound is sharp. It belongs to the hut in the same way the weathered step belongs to it, a repeated part of entering, a known movement through wood and metal and use. You stand on the threshold for a moment with the open field still at your back and the hut beginning to gather around your front and sides. The evening outside does not disappear. It remains over one shoulder as cooler air, fading grass light, and the broad open quiet of the hillside. But already it has changed sides. A moment ago it was the whole environment. Now it is what lies beyond the doorway. Inside, the room is smaller than the land prepared you for, and that is part of the relief. The hut does not try to be more than it is. A narrow floor of timber boards runs in from the step. A bed or bunk takes up most of one side beneath the window. Opposite, a ledge or shelf, and a short stool or small bench make use of the remaining wall. A hook carries the practical promise of somewhere to hang a coat. A folded blanket lies ready at the bed's edge. The window above holds the last of the evening in a dimmer, quieter square than the open hillside ever could. The whole room can be read in one glance. Then, because it is real, it begins to separate into smaller truths. The room's smallness does not feel cramped. It feels exact. The sort of room shaped by necessity until nothing unnecessary remains. The bed takes the wall it needs. The ledge takes the width left free. The stool or bench fits where a body can sit to remove boots or set something down without interrupting the rest of the room's usefulness. Even the space between door and bed is just enough, no more than the body needs to turn, step inward, and begin letting the open field fall away behind it. That exactness is part of the ease. Nothing in the hut wastes space pretending to be larger than it is. The timber inside holds different tones depending on where the light finds it. Boards nearer the door still carry a little of the evening brightness from outside, while those further in have already gone deeper into browns and weathered golds and the quieter gray that old wood takes on when it has been warmed, cooled, and touched across many seasons. Some knots show darker than the planks around them. Some seams have opened a fraction more than others. One upright near the bed is smoother at hand height, as if fingers have often steadied themselves there while turning in the room. None of it is polished into neatness. It is simply lived with. The boards underfoot are not all the same tone. Some have weathered darker along the grain. Others have been worn smoother and paler through the middle where boots have crossed them many times. Near the door, a faint dulling in the wood shows where dust and dry earth must sometimes be brought in from the path before being swept away again. The bed frame stands close enough that one hand could reach it easily from the middle of the room. Its outer edge has softened where fabric, and fingers have passed over it often. The blanket folded there is thick rather than decorative, its wool denser at the turn where it doubles back on itself. A small mug sits on the ledge, or perhaps an enamel jug, or both, not placed for prettiness, only left where such things are naturally left in a room this size. Beside it, there may be a tin, a book, a box of matches, a small lamp, the sparse, useful objects that gather in places where space is limited, and every surface must earn its use. Nothing crowds the room. Nothing hangs on the walls for effect. The hut has no interest in charm beyond what usefulness gives it. That is why it feels trustworthy so quickly. The trust comes partly from proportion and partly from repetition. A room this size cannot hide what it is. The bed is where it has to be. The ledge is where a hand would naturally reach. The hook sits at the height most useful for a coat taken off at the end of the day. The mug or jug on the shelf does not suggest hospitality in any staged sense, only the ordinary fact that someone has used this room for tea, for water, for quiet minutes out of the weather. Even the blanket's fold looks as though it has been lifted and laid back many times in the same practical way. The hut gives the sense that evening after evening has passed through it without fuss. There may be a faint mark on the wall where the back of the stool has touched before, a small dulling near the door where boots have nudged the lower boards, a slight hollow in the floor where feet have stood more often at the ledge than elsewhere. These things make the room feel more settled, not less. They tell the body that it does not need to invent how to be here. The room already knows. The floor gives a firmer answer than the step outside did, old boards holding steady beneath your weight. The room closes around you by a small but unmistakable degree. What had been a threshold becomes an interior. The wall at one side is near enough now to register as surface rather than structure. The bed is no longer part of a first impression, but part of the body's immediate map of the room. The ledge opposite sits at hand height. The hook is close enough to use without thinking about it twice. Even the dimness here feels measured rather than lacking, because the window still carries enough evening to describe the main lines of things without fully lighting them. Behind you, the open door continues to hold a piece of the hillside. The grasses outside have lowered in color. The dry stems still catch a little of the remaining light. The path is paler than the ground around it. A fence post or gate line stands darker now than before. All of it is still there, but already it feels further from the body than it did on the step. The hut has begun to intervene. Boards, walls, window, bed, ledge. The open land has become what lies beyond those things. You turn back into the room. That turn matters as much as the opening of the door did. The body no longer has to divide itself equally between outside and in. It can begin, in small practical ways, to belong to the hut instead of the path. One hand may come to the ledge first, touching the wood where use has smoothed it duller along the front edge. The other may rest on the bed frame or wall board nearby. Either way, the room is first claimed through touch, not admiration. The coat that felt appropriate on the hillside now feels like one layer too many for a room this close. You ease it open and let the fabric loosen from your shoulders. It no longer carries the open evening in the same way. The breeze that moved through the grass cannot follow you here except in the smallest traces coming through the doorway. The cloth of the coat has kept the field air for a while, but inside the hut it starts to release it quickly. What remains is only the weight of fabric and the ordinary comfort of not needing it so much anymore. If there is a hook by the wall, the coat goes there naturally. The wood or metal receives it with a soft contact. One sleeve may hang lower. The hem may brush the side of the wall board. Nothing needs arranging precisely. The room is too modest to require ceremony. That modesty changes the body quickly. Outside, the open slope asked for longer movement, broader attention, the small outdoor alertness that goes with crossing ground while light is still fading. Inside, everything narrows to reach and touch. The hand no longer has to swing freely at the side. It can come to the ledge. The shoulder no longer has to remain open to the breeze. It can turn toward the wall. Even the eyes stop scanning the hillside in wide measures and begin moving instead between bed, shelf, hook, floor, and window. The hut does not ask for admiration before use. It asks to be used, and that is why the body begins to soften in it so quickly. If you stand still for a moment, the difference becomes clearer still. Outside air continues beyond the doorway. Inside air stays where it is. Outside, the field runs on into distance. Inside, the room gathers itself within a few boards' width. Outside, evening is still something spread over land. Inside, evening has become a smaller thing, a dim pane, weathered wood, a blanket within reach, a place to set something down, a place where movement can begin to end. You might set something on the ledge then, a mug, a book, gloves, nothing elaborate. Or perhaps you simply leave the ledge as it is and pass your hand once across its worn edge before letting it be. Even that is enough. It tells the body that surfaces are close, that things can be put down here, that nothing needs to be carried any further tonight than from hand to shelf, from shoulder to hook, from doorway to bed. The bed is the clearest fact in the room now. Not luxurious, not softened into excess, just ready. Its cover is stretched more tightly in some places than others. Near the middle, it has the slight give and smoothing that repeated use leaves behind. Near the wall, it is creased faintly, where bedding has been pulled straight many times. The blanket folded over part of it is thicker than the room's other objects, holding both visual and practical weight. At the head, there may be a pillow, a rolled cushion, or a simple raised support beneath the cover, enough for a body to rest against later when the room has fully taken over from the land outside. You let your hand touch the blanket. The wool is dry and close woven, not fine, not delicate, just made to hold warmth and use. One section of the fold is a little denser where the fabric presses against itself. Another has softened along the edge where hands have lifted it by the same corner again and again. When your fingers leave it, it settles back without fuss. The room does not perform comfort. It simply contains it in the places where it is needed. The hut's small interior order begins to show itself more clearly now that you are no longer half outside. The window catch is dull with weather and use. The bed frame's edge is smoother where hands land most often. The stool beneath the ledge has one rung rubbed paler by boots. A floorboard near the bed shows a faint scuff where heels have turned beside it. The mug handle is turned outward not for effect, but because that is how it was last set down. These things are minor on their own. Together they make the hut more convincing than any prettiness could. It has been lived in. The bed's nearness matters more now than when first seen from the threshold. From here, it feels less like furniture and more like the room's center of gravity, the place toward which the rest of the hut quietly arranges itself. The ledge sits opposite it because the body lying there might want a mug, a lamp, a book, or nothing at all within easy reach. The window rests above it because the last of the evening can be seen from there without needing to stand. Even the blanket's fold seems to wait in relation to the bed rather than to itself, ready for hands that have crossed open ground and no longer need to keep moving. The frame beneath the blanket is close enough that one knee or hand could reach it without effort. Its edge has the sort of worn smoothness that comes from use rather than finishing. A thumb passed over it would find the grain less sharply raised than on untouched timber nearby. The room offers these details quietly, and because it offers them quietly, they are easy to believe. Nothing in the hut insists on comfort. It simply provides the exact objects through which comfort happens. You move a little further into it, and the doorway no longer feels like the center of the room. The bed does, or the space between bed and ledge. Somewhere within that small interior logic, the body begins to stop arriving and start inhabiting. Outside remains visible, but it now belongs beyond the frame of the door and the square of the window. Inside belongs to timber, blanket, boards, hook, shelf, and the reduced quiet of a place built to take the edge off open ground. The evening still lightens the window, but less than before. The grass beyond it is flatter in tone now. The path has become a pale track rather than a bright one. The slope outside is no longer a place to cross. It is only the larger world beyond the hut's boards. And here, in the first enclosed stillness of the shepherd's hut, with the door open behind you, the dry scent of timber held in the room, the bed close by, the blanket under your hand, and the small useful objects of the interior beginning to separate into trustable shapes, the open hillside has at last become outside, and the hut has begun to hold you properly within it. You move a little further into the hut and begin, without any need for decision, to let the evening arrange itself around the room's smaller scale. The first movements are practical and slight: a hand to the ledge, a sleeve eased back from the wrist, a little dry dust brushed from the side of your clothes where the grass caught at them on the path. Nothing that could properly be called a task, only the kind of motions a body makes when it has stopped traveling and has not yet fully sat down. The ledge receives your hand with that same smoothed dullness it carried before, the varnish worn softer at the front edge where fingers have often rested while small things were set down. If there is anything in your hand, it can be placed there easily enough. A mug, a book, gloves, nothing elaborate. The room does not ask for much. And because it asks for so little, every object seems to know its place before it arrives. The coat hangs where it was left, no longer carrying the hillside with it. Whatever warmth the body has kept now belongs to the hut instead of the walk. The fabric no longer moves in open air. It hangs against the wall boards and becomes part of the room's stillness, another quiet shape among other useful shapes. Even that small change deepens the sense that outside is now elsewhere, beyond the frame of the door, and the little dim pane, beyond the weathered boards and the short floor between bed and ledge. You let your hand pass once over the blanket again. Its fold is close and weighty beneath the fingers, not soft in any decorative sense, only trustworthy. One corner is flatter where it has been turned back many times before. Another edge shows the weave more clearly where the light from the window still reaches it. When your hand leaves, the wool settles into itself without fuss. That tiny settling seems to belong to the hut as a whole. Nothing in the room resists being used. Nothing in it insists on being preserved untouched. The floorboards answer lightly when you shift your weight. Near the door, they hold a little of the path in their duller scuffs and dustier grain. Further in, by the bed and stool, they are smoother in places where feet have stood often enough to leave their own quiet record. A narrow board near the ledge is slightly darker at one edge where something must once have spilled and dried long ago. The marks are small. They do not need telling, but they help the room feel more settled under the body, more ready to receive another evening without changing its nature for it. A glance turns to the window then, not because the outside is calling in the way it did from the path, only because the hut's small pane now holds what remains of the evening and makes it readable in a different way. Through the glass, the hillside has already begun flattening into dusk. The grasses that earlier separated themselves into straw, olive, seedhead silver, and pale dry green now lie closer together in tone. The path shows more faintly than it did before, a pale interruption through the field rather than a line the eye wants to follow. Fence posts stand darker now, their spacing more obvious than their shape. The slope behind them has lost the day's wider brightness and taken on the quieter, more even color that comes before true dark. The glass changes the outside as much as the evening does. The field is no longer all around the body. It is held at a distance now, framed and slightly softened. One corner of the pane reflects a little of the room behind you, the edge of the blanket, perhaps, or the dimmer shape of the ledge, or the faint inward falling of the door frame. That reflection is enough to begin making the outside feel less like the true world and more like what lies beyond shelter. A breeze moves the grass again, though from here it can no longer be felt directly on the skin. You see it in the shifting of the taller stems, and in the way one pale patch in the field darkens and brightens as the heads turn. The body no longer has to receive the evening air itself in order to know it is there. The hut has begun doing that work now. The boards hold the difference. The window holds it. The room receives the open hillside and keeps it on the far side of the pane. You stand there only long enough to feel the change complete. Then the eyes move back inward. The bed is nearer than the field now in every meaningful way. The ledge is nearer. The stool beside it is nearer. Even the hook with the coat hanging from it belongs more fully to the body's evening than the whole slope outside. You sit for the first true pause of the episode. Whether it is the edge of the bed or the little stool, the change is immediate not because the room alters, but because the body does. The muscles that have continued carrying the path a little way into the hut begin to give up that task. If you sit on the bed, the mattress receives you with the same firm, worked-in support it gave earlier when tested by hand. If you sit on the stool, the wood seat is harder, but not unfriendly, smoothed at the edges where many evenings have used it the same way. Either way, the room is no longer something crossed standing. It becomes something inhabited from stillness. Feet remain on the floor at first. The boards under your soles keep you in touch with the room's proportions. Bed close at one side, ledge opposite, wall near enough to reach, window above or beside, door no longer central. The knees ease. The shoulders lower a little. Hands come to rest where they naturally fall on the blanket, on your own knees, at the bed frame, along the ledge edge if sitting beside it. The body does not collapse into rest. It arrives there through small permissions. The back no longer needs the uprightness of walking. The neck no longer has to remain open to wind and distance. The eyes do not move in the same broad measures they did on the hillside. They shift instead between nearer things. The blanket fold, the bed frame edge, the mug handle on the ledge, the dull little catch at the window, the fine grain in a board near the floor where repeated feet have worn the finish down. That is the point where the hut becomes more than entered. It becomes lived in for the evening. From this seated stillness, the room tells the truth about itself more clearly. The bed frame edge is brighter, where hands land most often when someone sits here before turning in. The stool rung is rubbed smoother where boots have found it, while laces were undone or feet shifted in tiredness at the end of a day. The window catch is duller near the thumb place, and lighter at the corner where metal has taken the repeated contact of fingers. The mug on the ledge, if there is one, shows a faint darkening inside from recent use or from many earlier uses washed clean, but never erased from memory entirely. The blanket's tighter section in the weave catches the light differently from the looser part beside it. None of this is decorative. All of it is intimate. The room grows more believable with every small repeated use mark it offers. The bed does not need to be made prettier than it is. The ledge does not need extra objects. The hook does not need anything but the coat already hanging there. The floorboards do not need covering. The hut is not built for show. It is built for evenings like this one, when the light thins outside and the open ground gives way to a smaller world of timber, cloth, and nearness. That is why the body trusts it. A hand may drift once more to the blanket edge, not to pull it up yet, only to feel its closeness while sitting. The wool is slightly rougher where the weave rises more firmly. The fold nearest the body is warmer than the outer edge. Beneath it, the mattress cover is tighter and cooler by comparison, the difference between fabric made to hold heat and fabric made simply to support. One hand resting there can feel both at once, the order of the room expressed through touch instead of thought. The window dims further as you sit. Outside, the hillside is no longer a place of movement and route. It has become an evening surface beyond the glass. The path pales less. The grasses merge more. The fence line stays, but mostly as rhythm rather than detail. Perhaps one gate catches a final trace of light and lets it go again. Perhaps the slope nearest the hut remains visible while the farther one has already fallen into gray. It does not matter to know exactly. The field is beyond the room now, and what matters more is how little of it is needed once the body has stopped moving. Inside, the air is beginning to feel fuller than the window. Not warmer exactly. Closer. It rests against the timber and stays there. It holds the scent of wool and boards and old use. It does not move across the body the way the hillside air did. That absence of movement is one of the strongest changes of all. The hut now contains the evening rather than merely interrupting it. You do not need to stand yet. You do not need to lie down yet. It is enough to sit there for a while and let the room continue making itself known from stillness rather than approach. The bed is close enough to use whenever the body wants it. The ledge is within easy reach. The coat hangs where it belongs. The blanket waits where it will be needed. The window keeps the last of the hillside at a distance gentle enough not to draw you back out into it. A little more of the day leaves the field beyond the pain. A little more of the body leaves the path behind. The shoulders stay lower than before. The legs no longer feel arranged for walking. The hands rest more easily. And by the time the eyes move once more between blanket, ledge, bed frame, and dimming window, the shepherd's hut is no longer just the place you stepped into from the summer hills. It has become the true center of the evening, a small weathered room with everything close, everything useful, and the open land now softened beyond its walls, while the body begins, quietly and without effort, to belong there completely. The window holds the last readable version of the hills for a while longer, though even that begins to thin almost as soon as you look at it. The path you followed is still there, but fainter now than it was when you first came in. What had seemed pale against the dry ground has lowered towards the color of everything around it. The grasses beyond it no longer separate themselves so easily into seed head and stem and patch and slope. They lie closer together now, their tones reduced by the evening into flatter gold brown, olive gray, and the dimmer straw shades that remain visible a little longer than green does once the light begins to go. Fence posts still stand in their measured rhythm, but the spaces between them feel larger now that detail has withdrawn from the field. The pain changes the hillside too. Not much, only enough. Its small frame keeps the outside at a distance and cuts it down to what can be held within it. A broader slope becomes one quiet surface. A gate further off becomes only a darker interruption in the line. The path is no longer something the eye wants to follow. It is only a faint pale thread through grass that has already begun to give itself over to dusk. Near one corner, the glass catches the smallest part of the hut behind you, perhaps the edge of the blanket, the dim line of the ledge, the side of the door frame, and lays it lightly over the field. That overlap matters. The room has begun to place itself over the landscape. Outside, evening still holds the hillside. Inside, the hut is becoming shelter. The difference grows clearer the longer you sit with it. Outside, the land still spreads in all directions beyond the pane, but its breadth no longer carries the same force now that the room has framed it. The higher shoulder of the hill is still there, yet it has softened into one broad, dim mass rather than a place the eye might travel over. Lower down, the path loses itself more fully each minute among the grasses that once seemed divided into many dry textures and now lie closer together in tone. What remains readable does not invite movement anymore. It only confirms that the open ground continues beyond the hut while the body has stopped needing to belong to it. The pain helps with that. Its frame keeps the outside in its proper proportion now. The field is no longer all around you, only there beyond the glass, slightly dulled by the evening, and slightly gentled by the hut's own dim reflection laid over it. A darker line of fence may still hold. A gate may remain just legible for another few minutes before sinking into the same low field color as everything near it. The breeze still moves through the grass, but now the body is spared from receiving it directly. The hut has taken that task over and reduced it to something seen rather than felt. A breeze moves across the hill once more, though the body knows it now through sight rather than skin. The grasses bend and right themselves in a pale, uneven passing. One patch darkens briefly, another catches what remains of the light and loosens it again. The movement is gentle, but it no longer belongs to the body in the way it did on the path. The boards and the glass stand between you and it now. The hut has begun to keep the evening at one remove. When your attention turns back inward, the room feels smaller than it did a little while ago. Not because anything has changed in its measurements, because the body has. The bed is closer now in every meaningful way. The ledge opposite feels nearer, the hook nearer, the floorboards beneath your feet more fully part of where you are. Even the air inside the hut seems to have drawn in around the room's edges and settled there. It is not warmer in any dramatic sense, not close or stale, only held. A room-sized air, a timber-sized stillness. The dry smell of boards and wool and old use gathered into one contained atmosphere that no longer has to compete with the open slope outside. The walls matter more from stillness. Standing in the doorway, they were part of a first impression. Sitting here now, they become the room's true boundary. The boards run close beside the bed and behind the hook, and beneath the window in a pattern the eye no longer needs to map fully. Their grain is clearer where the light reaches it. Their darker seams hold the deepening evening more quickly. One upright near the bed has a smoother section at hand height. Another board nearer the floor keeps a faint scuff that has not vanished with time, only softened into it. The hut is not polished. It is weathered into usefulness. That usefulness begins to feel sheltering in a deeper way now. The room's proportions do more of the work than they first seemed to. Nothing is far from anything else here. The bed stands close enough that a hand can find its frame without reaching. The ledge does not merely sit opposite. It remains within the same immediate field as the blanket, the stool, the hook, the window. Even the floor between these things has the feeling of already used space rather than empty space. That changes the body's relationship to the room. You do not have to cross it in any real sense now. You only exist within it. The boards make that nearness feel honest rather than confining. Their weathered grain, the slight unevenness where one plank sits differently from the next, the old use written into smoothed edges and duller patches, all of it prevents the hut from ever feeling staged. It is too plainly itself for that. And because it is too plainly itself, the body does not resist letting it become the whole environment. Outside may still hold air and slope and distance, But inside, there are enough close truths now that distance has lost much of its claim. The bed no longer reads simply as a place to sit later or lie down eventually. It has begun to pull the room inward around itself. The ledge sits opposite because the body using the bed might want something near to hand. The window rests above because the last of the field can be seen from there without leaving the room's stillness. The blanket remains folded where it can be lifted easily when needed. The whole interior is arranged by necessity, and necessity here feels kinder than decoration would have felt. You shift a little where you sit, not enough to change the room, only enough to let the room take more of you. If you are seated on the edge of the bed, the mattress receives a little more weight than before. The support beneath you is firm, but not hard, softened through use at the center, and steadier at the edges where less of the body presses. If it is the stool beneath you, then perhaps one hand moves to the bed frame while the other rests at your knee, and the nearness of the mattress becomes more immediate than before. Either way, the movement is towards support, not away from it. Your shoulders lower by another small degree, not dramatically, only enough that the body no longer carries the same remnant of outdoor alertness it still had while first entering the room. The neck gives a little. The arms settle more naturally where they fall. The back stops holding itself as though ready to stand at once again. It is not sleep yet. It is simply the point where the evening inside the hut begins to ask less of the body than the hillside did. That reduction shows itself in small places first, in the way the shoulders stop carrying the width of the open land, in the way the knees no longer hold the readiness of walking, in the way one hand can stay on the blanket edge or the bed frame without needing to move on to the next thing. Even the eyes begin to work differently. Outside, they moved by distance: path, fence, rise, gate, sky over the slope. Inside, they move by reach: blanket, ledge, mug, pane, hook, floorboards, the immediate grain of a wall. If you lean back another fraction, the room changes again through that posture alone. The bed receives more of the body even before you properly lie down on it. The weight through the feet lessens. The spine no longer has to keep the same upright conversation with the floor beneath it. The hut begins to take some of that conversation into itself. Bed at one side, wall behind, ledge opposite, window above. It is all arranged so that the body can begin giving up its outdoor shape without any abruptness at all. One hand finds the blanket edge again. This time it stays there longer. The wool is the same as before: dense, dry, practical, but from this more settled posture, it feels different in relation to you. Closer. More obviously part of the evening that is forming indoors. The fold at the edge presses lightly back against your fingers. Beneath it, the weight of the blanket gathers into itself and waits. The bed frame, under the other hand, or at the side of the body, holds its own truth too. Smooth where use has worn it, firmer than the wool, cooler than skin, another quiet certainty at arm's reach. Your feet remain on the floor, but even they are less connected now to movement than to place. The boards beneath them are no longer simply something crossed on the way in. They have become part of the room's support. The grain under the fading light is duller than it was before. Near the bed, there is a patch worn smoother by repeated turning. Near the stool, one board shows a darker crescent where pressure must have marked it over time. None of it is striking. That is why it works. A room like this earns trust through small repeated truths rather than through anything that calls attention to itself. The ledge opposite gains weight in the room as the light lowers. Not visual weight, practical weight. A mug there matters more now than it might in daylight. A book there feels more settled. Even emptiness on the ledge would feel purposeful rather than bare, because the room has reached that stage of evening when surfaces do not have to prove themselves by holding many things. They only have to remain where a hand could reach them if needed. The hook with the coat still hanging from it belongs to the room differently now as well. Earlier, it was part of entering. Now it is part of staying. The coat no longer reads as clothing just removed. It has become another quiet shape absorbed into the hut's order, hanging against weathered boards while the body rests deeper inside their shelter. The window dims further. Outside, what remains visible is enough to know the hillside has not disappeared, but not enough for it to keep claiming the body's attention. The path pales less. The grasses merge more fully. The posts stand, but mostly as interruptions in one darkening line. A higher rise of ground becomes a broad, dim shape rather than a separate slope. The field is no longer inviting the eye outward. It is only continuing on the other side of the hut's boards. That is the true turning of this block. The room does not become larger or brighter or softer. It simply becomes more immediate than the land beyond it. You may lean back a little more now, or let one hip turn more fully onto the bed if that is where you sit. The posture changes just enough that the body is no longer arranged as though prepared to stand and move at once. One knee eases, the shoulders settle. A hand remains resting where it came to rest rather than shifting again. What was earlier a pause becomes something closer to staying. The close object world deepens with that stillness. The mug handle on the ledge turns outward at the same angle it was left. The window catch holds the same dull shine at the thumb place. The hook is brighter at one small point where metal has been touched often. The bed frame edge is smoother where hands land most. The blanket weave tightens and loosens across its fold in visible bands. A board near the floor keeps one pale nick in the grain. None of these details crowds the room. They settle into relation with one another the way the room itself has settled into relation with the body. A room this small can do that quickly. There are not many things in it, so each thing deepens faster. The ledge edge means more because it is always in relation to the bed. The mug means more because it sits within the same few feet as the blanket, and the window, and the hook. The floorboards matter more because they are not one surface among many, but the whole ground of the room. Even the dim pane becomes less a window than the hut's way of keeping evening visible without letting it back in. Nothing in the room is isolated. Each object belongs to a compact order in which everything can be felt almost at once. That compactness is part of why the room begins to overtake the hillside, not by grandeur, not by comfort performed too loudly, only by being close enough, used enough, and sufficient enough that the body stops wanting anything broader. The boards have already been weathered into place. The bed has already been pressed and settled by earlier nights. The blanket has already learned the weight of being lifted and laid back. The hut does not need to prove it can hold an evening. It only needs to go on being exactly what it already is. The bed close by, the blanket under the hand, the ledge opposite, the coat on the hook, the pane above, the boards beneath, the dimming of the field beyond the glass. Together they begin to make the hut feel not merely like a shelter entered from outside, but like the true center of the evening. You do not have to lie down yet to feel that shift. It happens here, while sitting, while the light thins and the room grows more complete around you. The body no longer keeps equal loyalty to the hillside and the hut. The balance has changed. The path, the grass, the broad slope, the open air, all of them still exist, but are distance moderated by timber and glass and nearness. What belongs most immediately to you now is the room, the bed at your side, the folded blanket, the close walls, the used edges of simple things, the smaller air held within them. A little more of the day leaves the pain. A little more of the body leaves the path behind. The shoulders stay lower than before. The hands remain where they rest. The room no longer feels like something you are using for a moment on the way to later. It feels like the place where the rest of the evening will happen. And here, with the field beyond the glass dimming towards one quiet surface, the weathered boards close around you, the blanket within easy reach, the bed already beginning to receive more of the body's weight, and the small, useful objects of the hut settled into their inevitable places, the open hillside has almost fully fallen away, and the shepherd's hut has begun to hold the whole evening around you. You do not need to decide to lie down. By now, the room has already arranged the evening in that direction, and the body follows it naturally. The movement begins in one of the smallest possible ways. A hand shifts on the blanket. A shoulder gives a little more. One foot draws in, then the other. The body turns more fully toward the bed's own logic and away from the uprightness it carried in from the path. If you have been sitting at the edge of the bed, the mattress is already half acquainted with your weight. It knows the shape of your hips and the slight angle of your shoulders. Now it takes more. The hand that rested at the frame or on the blanket remains there long enough to steady the turn, not because the room is uncertain, but because rooms this small make even gentle changes feel close and exact. The frame edge is smooth beneath the fingers. The blanket fold gathers where the hand passes. The boards underfoot are still there for a moment longer, then no longer needed in the same way. You ease back, not all at once, only in stages that feel too natural to count. The back lowers first. Then the weight of the hips leaves the edge and settles more fully inward. One shoulder meets the mattress more completely, then the other. The head comes later, finding the pillow or cushion only after the body has already begun to trust the bed beneath it. That gradualness matters. Nothing in the hut asks for collapse. Nothing in it asks for ceremony either. The bed is simply where the evening was always going to lead once the path, the field, the ledge, the window, and the first seated pause had done their work. The blanket moves with you. Its weight, which earlier was only something felt beneath the hand or across the knees, now becomes part of the body's fuller arrangement. It draws more evenly over the legs, then higher across the middle, not pulled with effort, only guided into place. The wool settles at once into its own use. Its denser fold lies closer at the lap. The broader spread across thighs and shins keeps a pocket of air that no longer escapes so easily into the room. Even before sleep, that difference is felt. The body no longer gives its warmth away to the evening as freely as it did outside on the hillside. The hut keeps more of it. The blanket keeps more of it still. Your head finds its place last. The pillow or cushion is not deep, not cloud soft, not anything exaggerated. It is exactly enough. The kind of support that receives the back of the skull and the line of the neck without asking to be noticed for itself. It sits against the wall or bedhead where many evenings must have found it before. Once the head lowers there, the whole room shifts scale again. What was a room for sitting in becomes a room for lying in. The ledge opposite is no longer a surface across from you. It is something within easy sight, but beyond any need to reach for it now. The hook with the coat is still there, though it has become only part of the room's upper outline, another quiet shape against the boards. The window above or beside you is no longer a standing window, no longer even a seated one. It has become a dim pane at the edge of the bed, a place where the last of the evening can remain without requiring anything from the body. The bed takes the body in full now. This is the most important change of the block. Until this point, some part of you still belonged to uprightness, to the balance of sitting, to the readiness of feet on boards, to the possibility of crossing the room again if needed. Lying down removes that final condition. The spine no longer keeps the room at a distance. The bed receives the full length of the back. The hips settle where the mattress softens slightly through use. The shoulders stop carrying their own small reserve of effort. The legs no longer wait, They simply rest where the blanket has covered them. The mattress is firmer than a house bed might be, and that is part of why it works. It does not invite sinking, it invites settling. Its surface gives in the places where many bodies must have rested before, but it keeps enough structure beneath that to make stillness easy. The center yields more than the edge. The part near the wall feels slightly more held. The section beneath the lower back receives weight differently from the section beneath the shoulders. None of this is dramatic. It is only the quiet truth of a bed used often enough to become honest. You feel it first at the hips and ribs, then through the shoulders, then in the legs once they stop carrying their own line and let the mattress hold it instead. That is where the body fully gives up the posture of evening and enters the posture of night. One hand may remain on top of the blanket. The other may rest nearer the wall or the bed frame. Neither needs to hold anything now. They have only to remain where they come to rest. The hut itself looks different from this lying down scale. The boards are closer in one direction and further in another. The ledge opposite is lower than it seemed while sitting. The hook has shifted upward in the frame of the room and now belongs more to the wall than to the body. The window has become a narrower part of the visible field, held by its frame and dimmed by the lowering light beyond it. Even the bed frame edge is changed by this posture. Earlier, it was something under the hand or at the knee. Now it is part of the boundary of the resting place, a low line within the room's immediate grammar. Everything has reduced to bed reach. Blanket, pillow, frame, pane, wall, ledge, the shape of the coat beyond them. The boards no longer underfoot, only around. That reduction is one of the strongest comforts in the block. The room no longer offers many possible relationships to the body. It offers one, rest here. A brief awareness rises again toward the pain. Outside is still there, but only just. The path is nearly lost now. What was once pale through the field has lowered into the same dim ground as everything around it. The grasses are no longer separate enough to read individually. They have become one darkening surface, interrupted only by the faintest change of tone where the slope shifts. Fence posts may still hold as short, darker strokes. A gate may survive as one low interruption in the line, but the hillside no longer exists in detail. It remains only as the last dim proof that the world beyond the hut has not vanished, merely withdrawn. The pain helps complete that withdrawal. It holds the outside at the proper distance and gives the room back to itself. A little reflection may lie over one corner, the edge of the blanket, the dark line of the frame, the soft inward light if any remains. Beyond that, the hill has almost gone. The body does not need it anymore. Inside becomes primary in a fuller way now. The blanket has settled. The bed has accepted the body. The pillow has found the head. The wall boards are close enough to steady the room without crowding it. The air has become room-sized completely, no longer sharing anything with the open field except what memory still lingers from the walk. You do not have to make the room quieter than it is. It does that itself. The longer you lie there, the more everything unnecessary falls back. The ledge and its objects, if there are objects on it, remain available, but no longer active. The coat on the hook no longer belongs to the body as clothing. It belongs to the room as one more absorbed shape. The floorboards have stopped mattering except as the ground under all of this. Even the window matters less now as view than as boundary, a dim and darkening edge beyond which the hills can continue without witness. What matters most is what touches the body directly. The blanket over the legs and middle, the mattress under back and hips, the pillow under head and neck, the nearness of the wall, the still hand, the smaller rise and fall of breath now that the body has no more need to carry itself. The hut begins doing almost all the work here. The room no longer needs to persuade the body of anything. The boards are close enough, the blanket heavy enough, the pillow sufficient enough that the body stops comparing this small shelter with the open hillside it came from. Outside had distance, air, and the broad evening slope. Inside has nearness, timber, wool, and the exact shape of what is needed now. The difference no longer feels like contrast. It feels like completion. The path, the grass, the gate, the fading field all remain where they are, but only as parts of a larger night that no longer needs to be crossed. What matters now is the bed under the body, the blanket keeping warmth close, and the hut standing quietly around both. That would strengthen the late transition and lift the count without bloat. Not by changing, not by performing comfort, only by being close enough, weathered enough, used enough, and sufficient enough that the body can stop helping so much. The shoulders no longer need to hold the width of the evening. The spine no longer needs to balance against sitting. The knees no longer keep the memory of the path. The hands no longer move between object and object deciding what remains to be done. Very little remains. One more tiny shift, perhaps, just enough to bring the blanket a little smoother over the knees, or to let the head settle another fraction into its support, or to rest the nearer arm more easily along the bed's length. Then even those possibilities begin to close. The room narrows further around that near stillness. The window dims, the ledge darkens. The bed frame holds its low line. The wall keeps its weathered grain where the remaining light finds it. The blanket's weave is clearer near the hand than it is at the feet because that is all the attention field can still usefully hold. Beyond the pain, the hillside is almost entirely gone now. No path worth following. No grasses worth distinguishing. No outer evening large enough to claim the body back from the bed. Only the knowledge that the land remains where it is and that you no longer need to be out in it. Inside, the hut has become complete. The bed carries the body. The blanket keeps warmth close. The pillow supports the head. The boards and ledge and hook remain where they should remain. Nothing is missing. Nothing asks to be added. This is the point where the room becomes more than evening shelter. It becomes full-body shelter. You lie there long enough to feel the truth of that without needing to name it. The bed no longer seems like an object within the hut. It has become the room's center from the body's perspective, the place through which all the rest is understood. The window is where the world has gone dim. The ledge is where what is not needed in bed remains. The hook is where the day's outer layer hangs. The boards are the close enclosure that lets the hills fall away. All of it serves the bed, and the bed now serves rest. No more movement is needed, only the low nearness of the room. The blanket over the body, the pillow under the head. The dim pane no longer holding any useful field beyond it. The weathered boards close around the bed. The body no longer upright in any sense at all. And here, lying fully within the shepherd's hut while the last of the summer hills fade almost entirely from the window, with the blanket settled, the bed doing its quiet work, and the whole small room reduced to what can be felt from rest, the open land has finally fallen away, and the hut has become a complete shelter around the body, one clear step from sleep. Nothing needs to change now. The blanket remains where it settled, its broad weight resting over the legs and higher across the middle of the body. Your head stays where the pillow or cushion received it earlier, supported in the same quiet place. One hand lies over the wool without pressure. The other rests nearer the wall or the bed's edge, not holding anything, only remaining where it came to rest. The pane above or beside the bed is dim now. The room has not altered. It has simply gone on holding you exactly as it already was. That sameness matters. Earlier in the evening, each part of the hut had to be entered and understood. The path, the threshold, the ledge, the bed, the window, the smaller stillness of the room itself. Now there is no new space left, no new surface to test, no new adjustment to make. The body remains where it was left, and because it remains there, the bed can go on carrying more of it without asking anything in return. The blanket is one of the nearest things now, not as an object to be noticed in any broad way, only as a steady layer of weight and retained warmth over the lower body. Beneath it, the legs no longer seem separate enough to require thought. The knees stay where they settled. The shins and feet rest in the same unseen line below the wool. A little warmth remains gathered there and does not need seeking. It is already kept. Each breath shifts the blanket only slightly, then lets it settle back into its folds again. The pillow beneath your head is another of those nearest things, not something to be arranged any longer, only the place where the head has rested for long enough to belong there. The support beneath neck and skull remains even. The wall beyond it stays close without ever pressing. The upper back and shoulders lie in the same supported line as before, and the mattress beneath them receives that line without change. There is less and less to notice beyond what touches the body directly. Blanket, pillow, mattress under hips and back, the nearness of the wall, the small rise and fall beneath the wool. After that, very little. The hut continues quietly around the bed. The ledge opposite remains where it was. The coat still hangs at the hook. The boards keep their weathered grain in the dimness. The bed frame holds its low line at the edge of the resting place. None of these things asks to be used now. None asks to be looked at for long. They remain in the room not as tasks or choices, only as settled parts of the same small order that has already done its work well. That is one of the deepest changes of the ending. Earlier, each object meant something practical. A ledge to set things down, a hook to take the coat, a blanket to lift, a bed to turn toward, a window to hold the last of the hills. Now their functions have nearly fallen away. What remains is their presence. The coat a darker shape against the boards, the ledge a narrow plane opposite, the bed frame a low boundary, the pane a dim square where the outside has nearly gone. The room no longer needs to be read. It only needs to go on being there. If awareness rises lightly toward the pane, it finds almost nothing beyond it. A little dimness in the glass, a faint reflection laid across one part of it. Beyond that, no path worth following. No grass distinct enough to separate. No fence line with much claim left in it. The hills remain only as a depth of dark beyond the hut, and even that depth has almost withdrawn too far to matter. The pane no longer serves as a view. It serves only as a boundary. Inside the side of it, blanket, pillow, bed, boards, breath. Beyond the other side, night continuing without the need to witness it. The body turns back inward at once, not by decision, but because nothing outward has anything more to offer now than the room already does. The blanket edge near your resting hand remains in the same folded line. The bed frame, if your fingers touch it, keeps the same worn smoothness at the place of repeated contact. The wall boards remain close by. The ledge opposite stays where it was, though it no longer matters what rests upon it. The coat on the hook has already been absorbed into the room's stillness. Nothing changes. That lack of change becomes part of the comfort. The room has narrowed to bed scale now. There is no need anymore to think of the threshold or the path or the field beyond the glass. Those parts of the evening have already done their work and fallen back into a more distant layer of the night. What remains useful now is smaller than that. The blanket over the body, the pillow under the head, the wall close enough to steady the sense of where you are. The pane gone dim. The weathered boards keeping the room in its proper shape around the bed. The body no longer needs anything broader than this. It is no longer room-sized in any wider sense. No path remains in mind, no threshold, no standing window, no stool or first-seated pause. only the part of the hut that touches the resting body, and the little more than that which remains faintly present around it. A hand at rest, the blanket under it, the supported line of the back, the pillow at the head, the pane gone dim, the boards close by. After that, less and less. Breath continues beneath the blanket. The wool rises a little, then settles. The mattress receives the movement, then holds still again. Between one breath and the next, there is no need to improve anything. No need to move a shoulder. No need to shift a hand. No need to pull the blanket higher or turn toward the wall or look toward the pane. The body has already arrived where it was going. The room's own quiet deepens out of that, not silence, not complete immobility, only the absence of any further need to take part. The blanket remains where it was left. The pillow remains under the head. The boards remain close. The ledge remains opposite. The bed continues to receive more weight than before until the body is lying in it not as something newly settled, but as something already accepted and already partly forgotten into rest. The nearer objects begin to lose even their names, not completely, only enough that function matters less than shape. The blanket is no longer something drawn over the body. It is simply the close weight above the legs and middle. The pillow is no longer a support chosen by the head. It is simply where the head rests. The bed is no longer furniture in a hut. It is simply what lies under the body and keeps it from the floor and the open land beyond. The pane is no longer something looked through. It is simply the dim edge of outside. The boards are no longer wall or structure. They are simply the room continuing close by. Presence matters more now than naming. The hand at rest, the wool beneath it, the line of the wall, the low dimness at the pane, the support under back and legs, the small field of breath, that is enough to carry the last waking layer. A long stillness passes like that, made of almost nothing more than these few continuities. The blanket holding warmth, the bed supporting the body, the pillow remaining under the head, the pane gone dim, the hut standing quietly around all of it, the breath that lifts and settles and leaves everything else undisturbed. If some faint outdoor sound forms beyond the hut now, it is too far away to enter meaningfully before it fades. If the hills continue on the other side of the pane, they do, so without needing the eye. If the summer night deepens over the grass and path outside, it does, so without needing the body out there in it. What remains nearest is smaller than all of that. The blanket, the pillow, the close boards, the dim pane, the hand at rest, the breath beneath the wool, and after that, less to notice still. The pane becomes almost blackness alone. Support becomes simpler now. The room becomes simply nearness. The hut becomes simply the quiet standing shape around the bed. Nothing interrupts, nothing enters. Nothing asks for one last turn of the head, one last touch at the blanket, one last thought about the hillside beyond the glass. Only the small rise and fall beneath the wool, the quiet weight of the resting hand, the support under head and back, the weathered room continuing around you without effort. Then even those distinctions begin to thin, until there is almost nothing left but being held.